That afternoon, a man unlike any who usually stayed at the Avalon Regency pushed through the revolving doors and entered the luxurious lobby. While businessmen in Italian suits and ladies adorned with expensive jewelry were welcomed with flawless smiles, he was immediately treated as if he were just a nobody, someone who had no right to remain there. What no one knew was that, within minutes, that entire scene of arrogance and disdain would turn into one of the greatest reversals the hotel had ever witnessed. The atmosphere breathed wealth. The polished marble floor reflected the crystal chandeliers hanging from the ceiling, the walls were lined with dark mahogany panels, and the air carried the subtle fragrance of fresh flowers. Designer suitcases rolled on golden carts pushed by hurried staff, while elegant guests spoke in hushed tones, holding glasses of white wine in the lounge. And then he appeared. Rowan Mercer, worn felt hat, an old leather suitcase in hand, a light shirt, and boots that clashed entirely with the setting. His steady footsteps echoed through the hall, not with arrogance, but with the calmness of someone who knew exactly who he was. Behind the reception desk, two receptionists exchanged discreet glances. One diverted her eyes to the computer, the other pretended to shuffle papers, as if neither had noticed the new guest. It was the rehearsed silence of those who avoid dealing with someone who does not belong in that world. Some guests also noticed the scene. A middle-aged couple paused their conversation and glanced sideways, their expressions tinged with discomfort. A young executive in a blue suit furrowed his brow and returned to his phone, as if what he was witnessing was too embarrassing to acknowledge. But there was someone who looked differently. Lena Ward, the waitress in charge of serving the welcome drinks, was crossing the lobby with a silver tray. Crystal glasses sparkled upon it, accompanied by delicate hors d'oeuvres. Her eyes rested on Rowan without judgment. There was no disdain, no malicious curiosity. Only the genuine attention of someone who sees the person before seeing the clothes they wear. Rowan noticed that look. For an instant, the contrast between everyone else's indifference and the quiet kindness of that young woman created a small thread of humanity in the heavy atmosphere. He removed his hat politely and walked up to the desk. That was when Maurice Carter, the manager, emerged from his office. Impeccable gray suit, hair slicked back with gel, cold smile. His eyes scanned Rowan from head to toe like a scanner evaluating merchandise of little worth. "Good afternoon," Rowan said calmly. "I'd like a room for 3 nights." Maurice placed his hands on the mahogany counter and leaned slightly forward. "Of course, sir." His pause was deliberate, his tone laced with irony. "Do you have a reservation?" "No. I came straight from the countryside. I thought I might get a room today." A few heads turned toward the conversation. The lady with the pearl necklace whispered something to her husband. The young executive stopped scrolling on his phone. The lobby was beginning to turn into a silent audience. Maurice typed slowly on the computer, as though each keystroke were a hammer blow. "Our rooms are a bit exclusive," he said, dragging out the word. "We only have suites available, $1,200 per night." The amount echoed in the air like a final strike. The guests expected the simple man to back down, apologize, or perhaps leave in shame. But Rowan only nodded. "All right. You can book it." Morris's face twitched for an instant, but he quickly regained his composure with an even more cynical smile. "You understand that we uphold a certain standard here, don't you? We need assurances. Credit card, proof of income." His voice grew louder, ensuring everyone could hear. And then came the sentence that turned that moment into a spectacle. "In fact, let's do this. If you can pay for the cheapest room in cash, I'll give you the presidential suite for free." Lena nearly dropped the tray in her hands. The air in the lobby grew heavy, as if everyone had stopped breathing at once. Rowan lifted his eyes, and his calmness made Maurice lose his balance for a fraction of a second. "I accept," he said, firm, serene. The entire lobby fell silent. It was no longer just a check-in. It was a duel. At that moment, under the eyes of the luxurious Avalon Regency, a simple man, treated like an intruder, accepted a wager made to humiliate him. No one there could have imagined that the fate of the arrogant manager, the invisible waitress, and the hotel itself would change forever from that single yes. And here is where the true story begins. Who was that man who seemed so calm amid such disdain? The answer would soon come, and it would shock every person present. If you believe that appearances do not define worth, write the word truth in the comments. Because the truth about to be revealed will surprise everyone. The silence still lingered in the Avalon Regency lobby after the cruel bet. Some guests had literally stopped in their tracks, watching as if witnessing a duel. And while Rowan Mercer remained calm in the face of humiliation, each person present began to reveal what they carried within themselves. Maurice Carter, the manager, felt at the height of his power. He had built an entire career in luxury hotels, cultivating the ability to separate, in seconds, those who belonged in such an environment from those who were nothing more than intruders. That was what he prided himself on, having eyes trained to recognize status in details, the cut of a suit, the brand of a watch, the leather of a suitcase. At that moment, when he saw Rowan with his hat and simple boots, he felt like a predator facing the easiest prey. Every word he spoke was calculated to squeeze out the maximum embarrassment, and the surrounding audience only increased his sense of triumph. Across the hall, Lena Ward held the silver tray tightly. The crystal glasses reflected the chandelier lights above, but her eyes were fixed on Rowan. She was young, but she had already seen firsthand what disdain could do to a person. She had worked at the hotel for 2 years, supporting her mother and younger brother since their father had vanished from their lives. Double shifts, lost weekends, always smiling at clients who treated her as invisible. Her dream was simple but distant, to study interior design, to transform cold spaces into welcoming places. But every overdue bill, every expensive medicine her mother needed, kept her there, tray in hand, body exhausted, smile rehearsed. And even so, she had something different. She judged no one. It wasn't a conscious choice, it was instinct. When her eyes met Rowan's, she didn't see dusty boots or an old suitcase. She saw someone who had arrived alone, carrying weight on his shoulders, yet with his dignity intact. He noticed. And for a second, that silent look was a relief, a thread of humanity in an environment that seemed determined to crush him. Rowan took a deep breath. His eyes swept across the luxurious hall, the marble columns, the mahogany counter, the imported rugs. None of it impressed him. Not because it wasn't grand, but because he knew different kinds of wealth, quiet ones, built over years. There, however, he was determined to keep his disguise. And the calmness in his voice irritated Maurice even more. Well then, the manager provoked with a calculated smile. Will you back down now, or do you prefer to continue this charade? Lena's tray shifted discreetly. She wanted to step closer, to offer more than a drink. Perhaps just a simple word, "Can I help?" But she knew the hotel's unspoken rules. It was not a waitress's role to intervene in guests' disputes, much less to contradict the manager. So she remained still, but her eyes did not move away from Rowan. A few steps away, a lady in a red dress whispered to her husband. How unnecessary. The man only nodded, uncomfortable. Rowan, in turn, simply rested his hat on the leather suitcase and replied with serenity. I said I accept. The phrase fell into the air with unexpected weight. Maurice blinked twice, unable to believe what he was hearing. No one remained that calm after being humiliated. No one, except someone who carried a truth not yet revealed. Lena felt a chill run down her arms. Instinctively, she knew this was no ordinary man. And something inside told her that the scene unfolding before her eyes was only just beginning. The silence in the lobby of the Avalon Regency seemed heavier than the crystal chandeliers that lit the room. Maurice Carter's cruel bet still echoed in everyone's ears. For a moment, no one breathed deeply, no one dared to move. Then Rowan Mercer lifted his gaze. With an almost defiant calm, he set the worn hat on his leather suitcase and said, in a firm voice, I accept. The impact of the word made some guests glance at each other. A lady let out a nervous laugh. Two young men in impeccable suits leaned forward to get a better view. It was as if, suddenly, everyone had been invited to witness a spectacle of humiliation and no one wanted to miss the next act. Maurice, of course, noticed. And, like a good actor on his marble stage, he raised his voice to ensure everyone could hear. "Well then," he said, spreading his arms as if announcing a circus act. "If you can pay the $350 for the cheapest room, right here, right now, in cash, I will give you the presidential suite, which costs over $1,200 a night absolutely free." A murmur rippled among the guests. Some smiled, others frowned. The game had begun. Rowan did not hurry. He pulled his suitcase closer, dragging it toward one of the velvet sofas. With slow gestures, he unzipped it, the sound creaking softly in the attentive silence. Inside were meticulously folded clothes, a pair of books, and a slightly crumpled brown envelope. Before he could proceed, a female voice broke through the tension with softness, like a delicate note amid a drum concerto. "Mr. Carter," began Lena Ward, balancing the silver tray in her hands. "Perhaps we could handle this matter more discreetly. The lobby is full of guests." Maurice turned his face slowly, as if he couldn't believe that a mere waitress had dared to intervene. A cold smile spread across his lips. "Thank you, Lena, but I don't need advice on how to conduct my work." His tone was cutting, though polished enough to sound acceptable to those unaware of his arrogance. "Return to your duties, please." Lena's heart pounded. For a second, she thought of retreating. But with a sudden impulse of humanity, she tilted the tray toward Rowan. "Would you like something to drink?" she asked gently, her voice almost a whisper. "Perhaps some juice, or a coffee." Rowan lifted his eyes to her. It wasn't a look of pity or need, but of recognition. As if he were before the only person in that hall who saw him beyond the dusty boots and old suitcase. He inclined his head slightly, in gratitude. "Water, please," he replied. That simple gesture broke, for an instant, the atmosphere of judgment. The sound of ice clinking against crystal, as Lena poured the glass and offered it to Rowan, brought a breath of normalcy to the scene. But Maurice would not allow it to last. "Lena," he said firmly, without losing the smile. "Do not interfere. This guest knows very well what he must do." The words were like a disguised slap in front of everyone. Lena lowered her eyes, embarrassed, and stepped back. Still, Rowan held the crystal glass firmly and, before drinking, gave her a silent look of gratitude. Then, unhurriedly, he opened the brown envelope and removed several bundles of bills. They were not flashy, not tossed around like the showiness of a gambler. They were organized, counted, folded with precision. The murmurs swept through the room once more. "He actually has money." "What? I thought he was a laborer." Where could it have come from? Maurice, now, wasn't so certain of the role he was playing. Yet he kept smiling, clinging to the illusion of control over the scene. Well, he said loudly, theatrically. "It seems you've surprised us. But it's not over yet. You still need to hand me the full amount. Cash, up front." Rowan stacked the bills on the small table beside the sofa, with firm movements, without ostentation. Each dry thud of the money against the marble echoed through the hall like a hammer strike against Morris's pride. And, deep down, Lena never took her eyes off him. Not merely out of curiosity or relief that this simple man would not be humiliated as the manager intended, but because there was something different in every gesture he made, a calmness that seemed impossible amid such hostility. She didn't know why, but she was certain this guest was far more than he appeared to be. The bills stacked before everyone seemed to weigh more than bars of gold. The sharp sound of the last bundle hitting the table left the lobby in a charged, almost uncomfortable silence. Rowan adjusted his hat atop the suitcase and leaned back against the velvet sofa, as if nothing significant had happened. Maurice Carter, on the other hand, seemed to lose a little of his theatrical poise. He still wore a smile, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of doubt. "Very well," he said, straightening his tie. You brought money, excellent. But here at the Avalon Regency, we don't accept just any folded paper in bundles. We must confirm authenticity, limits, credibility. After all, this is a prestigious hotel. The whispers grew louder. He's still going to try to disqualify him. But it's already paid. This is absurd. Rowan remained calm. He took out the simple cell phone he carried and dialed a number, putting it on speaker. 3 rings. A firm male voice answered. Mercer and Associates, Finance Department. Good afternoon. Maurice raised an eyebrow. Mercer? The name sounded faintly familiar, but he quickly brushed off the thought. This is Rowan, said the man in boots, calmly. I need you to confirm, in front of everyone, the funds available for an immediate transaction. On the other end, silence for a moment. Then the accountant's voice steadied. Mr. Mercer, at this time you have immediate liquidity of $120 million in accessible accounts, in addition to tied-up assets. Would you like me to also confirm the corporate credit lines? A murmur swept across the lobby like a wave. 120 million? Did he say millions? It can't be, that man is dressed like a common laborer. Lena Ward almost let the tray slip from her hands. Her heart pounded so loudly it felt like everyone could hear it. She looked at Rowan, trying to understand. He wasn't just a man with some savings. He belonged to a distant, unreachable world. Maurice swallowed hard but recovered his smile. There must be some mistake, he muttered, though his voice no longer carried the same triumphant tone. Perhaps some kind of act. A staged call. Rowan didn't respond immediately. He simply thanked the accountant and ended the call with a single touch. Then he lifted his eyes to Maurice and said, without raising his voice, Is that enough to confirm I can pay for one night at your hotel? The manager felt the blood rush to his face. Some guests chuckled quietly. Others stared at him as one might watch a man trapped by his own game. Even so, Maurice did not back down. We value credibility here, Mr. Mercer. He pronounced the surname with disdain, as if it were nothing special. So until all procedures are completed, I stand by my position. Rowan merely adjusted his hat again, as if to say without words, time will tell. Lena, silently, did not take her eyes off him. Something inside her told her she was standing before someone who carried a truth far greater than anyone imagined. The atmosphere in the Avalon Regency lobby was no longer the same. After the speakerphone call, it had become almost suffocating. Guests, once amused spectators, now whispered among themselves in astonishment. But Maurice Carter could not bear to lose ground. If there was one thing that defined his career, it was the pride of always having the last word. He smoothed his tie with a calculated gesture and raised his voice again, with the tone of a man commanding a stage. Very well, Mr. Mercer. If you truly have the resources you claim, let's raise the bar. How about a new test? All eyes turned to him. Some guests frowned. It was already clear this was no longer protocol but pure spectacle. Maurice continued. If you want the presidential suite, it's not enough to pay for the cheapest room. I want you to guarantee now, 3 full nights, with all services included. Total value, $3,600. A collective gasp rippled through the lobby. It was as if the manager had played his last card, determined to force the simple man to retreat. But Rowan Mercer merely rested his hat on the arm of the sofa and replied with serenity. No problem. The natural ease of the answer shattered the effect Maurice had expected. The audience reacted with stifled laughter and astonished expressions. Lena, who until then had remained silent, could no longer contain herself. She took a step forward, tray steady in her hands, and spoke in a respectful yet firm tone. Mr. Carter, with all due respect, the Avalon Regency has always treated every guest with discretion and dignity. Perhaps it is not appropriate to expose someone this way who only wishes to stay here. Morris's smile vanished for an instant, replaced by a harsh expression. Lena, this is none of your concern, he snapped, his voice hard, echoing through the lobby. Return immediately to your station, or we will discuss your position here later. The silence that followed was almost as strong as a slap that never came. Lena lowered her eyes, embarrassed, but inside she refused to feel ashamed. And Rowan, without saying a word, looked at her again with that same silent recognition, as though she were the only one in that place who dared to see beyond appearances. Maurice, irritated, was about to say more when the glass doors of the lobby opened. A group of hurried staff entered, carrying personalized leather suitcases. Behind them, a middle-aged man in an impeccable navy blue suit walked with steady steps. It was Richard Davenport, a Boston real estate magnate and frequent client of the Avalon Regency. The entire lobby shifted in respect, and Maurice was already preparing a rehearsed smile to greet him when the unexpected happened. Richard didn't look at him. His eyes, instead, landed directly on Rowan. And within seconds, his expression of indifference gave way to surprise. "Rowan Mercer," he said clearly, loud enough to echo through the hall. "What an honor to see you here." The murmur exploded once more. Guests exchanged stunned glances. Lena nearly let out the breath she had been holding in her chest. Rowan merely gave a faint smile and inclined his head. "Mr. Davenport. Good to see you as well." Maurice, meanwhile, felt the ground open beneath his feet. All his confidence, all his theatrical power, evaporated in an instant. That simple man, whom he had humiliated before everyone, not only had money, he was recognized by one of the most powerful names in the city. The lobby was no longer the stage for a cruel bet but for a revelation that was only beginning. The name Rowan Mercer still echoed in the lobby after Richard Davenport's greeting. The Boston magnate, respected among the wealthy, had interrupted his own grand entrance solely to acknowledge the man everyone had assumed was just a common traveler. Shock hung in the air. Maurice Carter felt cold sweat run down his neck, yet he could not retreat. His eyes swept the hall, realizing that the guests, once amused by the wager, now looked at him with judgment. The spectacle had shifted direction, and he was its target. Rowan, for his part, remained serene. He placed the hat back atop the leather suitcase and calmly raised his phone. No hurried gesture, no ostentation. Only the same composure he had kept since the beginning. "Perhaps it's time to end this theater," he said, his voice clear, without forcing it louder than necessary. Even so, every syllable seemed to echo beneath the ornate ceiling. The touch of his fingers on the screen brought up a digital document. A golden header, official seals, and in bold, the name no one could ignore. Avalon Regency Holdings, Investment Certificate. Rowan Mercer, majority owner. For a few seconds, no one reacted. It was as if the entire hall had lost its breath. The only sound was the faint bubbling of the marble fountain in the background. A guest let out a gasp, hand flying to her mouth. Another man in an expensive suit leaned forward, as though unable to believe what he was seeing. The impact spread in silent waves, from shock to disbelief, from disbelief to inevitable recognition. Lena Ward, standing with the tray pressed to her chest, felt her stomach turn. The world seemed to spin slowly before her eyes. Now, everything made sense: the steady gaze, the serenity in the face of humiliation, the calmness that disarmed provocation. He was not just a simple man. He was the owner, the true pillar of that luxurious place where she worked without ever feeling that she belonged. Maurice Carter, meanwhile, turned pale. His eyes widened, fixed on the glowing phone screen, then shifted back to Rowan's calm face. He tried to speak, but his voice faltered. Mr. Mercer. I didn't." Rowan did not interrupt him. He simply closed the document and slipped the phone back into his pocket, like a man returning a weapon to its holster after a precise shot. "I did not come here to be displayed, Mr. Carter," he said, his deep voice now carrying even greater weight. I came to observe how my guests are received." A reverent silence filled the lobby. It was no longer just surprise, it was respect, even tinged with fear. The weight of Rowan's words seemed to fill the space, greater than any chandelier or tapestry. "And I must confess," he continued, after a calculated pause, "I saw more than I expected." Maurice stepped back half a pace. His legs trembled, though he tried to maintain composure. Impossible. The scene had reversed brutally, from absolute master of the hall to a defendant exposed before everyone. I didn't know," he stammered. "I couldn't have imagined." Rowan inclined his head slightly, but he showed no compassion. "Now you know." The remark fell like a sentence. The guests began murmuring again, but no longer in mockery, this time in admiration. A woman whispered, "He stood here the entire time, being humiliated, and he never raised his voice." "That's exactly what makes him different," replied the man beside her. Lena still kept her eyes fixed on Rowan. It was impossible not to admire such calmness. But more than that, she felt something stir inside her, a mixture of hope and respect. For the first time, someone was showing that dignity could be more powerful than arrogance. Maurice, pale, tried one last time to save himself. "Mr. Mercer, you must understand, my intentions were only to maintain the hotel's standard, to preserve the image." But his voice faltered, and everyone could see it. The manager was nothing more than a small man now, trying to justify the unjustifiable. Rowan crossed his arms, and for a moment, the simple posture of a man in boots transformed into the silent authority of someone who truly commanded. "Standard," he repeated. "The standard of humiliating those you deem inferior? The standard of exposing someone before strangers just to feel bigger?" Each question echoed like a hammer blow. Maurice could not answer. Richard Davenport, still near the door, watched in silence, a restrained smile on his face. He knew he was witnessing a rare spectacle, a powerful man revealing himself at the most unlikely moment. Rowan then stepped forward. No haste, no anger. Only the certainty that every eye in the hall was fixed on him. The Avalon Regency has always been a symbol of luxury. But today, here, before everyone, I saw how a symbol can be corrupted when respect is forgotten. The silence that followed was almost solemn. Lena felt a lump in her throat. Those words seemed not only directed at the manager, but at everyone who had ever judged another by appearances. She herself had often been the target of such looks. Maurice, defeated, let out a trembling sigh. There were no masks left to wear. The stage no longer belonged to him. And Rowan, with the serenity of a man who never needed to shout to be heard, concluded. "Today, Mr. Carter, I learned far more about this hotel than in any financial report." He slipped the phone back into his pocket, adjusted his hat, and left the sentence hanging in the air. No one dared to move. The entire lobby knew they had just witnessed something that would forever change not only the fate of an arrogant manager, but the very story of that place. The Avalon Regency's lobby remained in silence. The weight of the revelation still lingered in the air, and every gaze was fixed on Rowan Mercer. He walked toward the reception desk. The sound of his boots echoed across the marble, measured, steady, unhurried. Each step seemed to announce that the final decision was near. Maurice Carter, the manager, stood frozen, his face as pale as the marble columns holding up the atrium. His eyes avoided Rowan's, as if still searching for a refuge that no longer existed. Rowan stopped in front of him. He didn't need to raise his voice. The authority in his tone came from the truth revealed. "Mr. Carter," he began, "a hotel manager's role is not to be a judge of appearances. It is to ensure the comfort and respect of every guest who walks through these doors." Maurice tried to speak, his voice trembling. I only. Rowan silenced him with a calm gesture of his hand. "Not only did you expose a guest to ridicule," he continued, "but you have also been abusing your position to disguise reports. I received copies of all the Avalon Regency's expenses and revenues, and I can assure you, some additional fees did not go unnoticed. A murmur rippled through the guests. Some exchanged surprised glances, realizing that the situation went far beyond prejudice. Morris's face tightened. For the first time, he seemed to shrink before his own reflection. Lies in the reports, arrogance with staff, humiliation of guests. Rowan listed each point calmly, as though weighing the charges on a scale. If it depended only on me, you would leave this position today. Lena's heart raced. She was so close she could feel the heavy air around her, the silence thick with expectation. Then Rowan drew a deep breath and added, "But I believe everyone deserves the chance to relearn." Maurice lifted his eyes, incredulous. "You will not be dismissed, Carter. You will be transferred to a smaller unit, in the countryside, where you will start over. As an assistant, not as a manager. There, you will have the chance to relearn what it means to serve before you command." Shock spread across the hall. It was not merely punishment, it was a sentence with the possibility of redemption. Maurice swallowed hard, unable to respond. The guests now looked at him with a mix of reproach and contempt. The man who once prided himself on judging had been judged, and the sentence was public. Rowan then turned, and his eyes met Lena Ward's. She stood motionless, but her posture revealed her nervousness, tray against her chest, breath restrained, her gaze torn between fear and hope. He walked toward her. For a moment, Lena's heart seemed to stop. Rowan inclined his head slightly, acknowledging her before everyone. "Throughout this entire episode," he said, his voice clear and steady, "only one person here had the courage to offer humanity in the midst of judgment." Lena's eyes widened in surprise. "You, Miss Ward," Rowan continued. "While others laughed or stayed silent, you offered me respect. That is what I want to represent the Avalon Regency." The words echoed through the lobby, and Lena felt her knees weaken. "From today onward, you are no longer just a waitress," Rowan continued firmly. "You will be a shift leader and responsible for training new staff. I want each of them to learn, from the very beginning, that humanity is worth more than appearances." The hall responded with soft applause that quickly grew, filling the space. Some guests smiled at her, others nodded in approval. Lena, with tears forming in her eyes, only shook her head in gratitude. Her voice faltered, yet she still managed to whisper, "Thank you, Mr. Mercer." Rowan smiled faintly. There was no ostentation in his gesture. Only the serenity of someone who knew that justice is not only about correcting wrongs, but also about recognizing virtues. While Maurice remained shrunken behind the counter, Lena, for the first time, felt she was truly seen. The Avalon Regency's lobby was no longer the same. The atmosphere that had begun with humiliation and scorn was now marked by a lesson everyone would carry with them. Rowan Mercer, with the same serenity as always, placed his hat back on and adjusted the suitcase at his side. He needed no long speeches, no grand gestures. The simple fact that he had revealed who he was and, above all, how he acted in the face of arrogance, had spoken louder than any fortune could buy. Maurice Carter remained behind the counter, head bowed, carrying the weight of the sentence. He was no longer the proud manager, but a man who would have to relearn the meaning of the word humility. And Lena Ward. She was still trembling, but now not from fear. She felt something she hadn't experienced in a long time: recognition. For the first time, someone saw value not only in her work, but in the way she treated people. While the discreet applause still echoed through the lobby, Rowan gave her one last approving look. A look that said, without words, "Stay this way. The world needs more people who can see beyond appearances." Then he turned, walking toward the glass doors. The chandelier's reflections blended with his figure, and when the doors opened, the night breeze entered, as if the hotel itself exhaled in relief after so much weight. The Avalon Regency would never be the same. Nor its guests. Nor Lena. That night, everyone at the Avalon Regency came to understand something money could never teach: that true wealth is not in a bank balance, nor in the luxury of a hotel suite. True wealth is in how we treat people, in the choices we make in the face of fragility, in the respect we offer even when the world chooses to judge. Rowan Mercer, a billionaire who could have bought silence with numbers, chose instead to teach with dignity. And Lena Ward, a waitress almost invisible to many, showed that greatness can live in the simplest gestures: a glass of water offered, a word of respect, a look free of judgment. And you? If this turning point made you reflect on what truly matters in life, write the word justice in the comments. Because, in the end, each of us has the chance to choose between judging or treating others with humanity.